Archiving started.
Hi. Well, let's try this again since I had a difficult situation with my computer, but I just love technology and it's okay. So we may have glitches from now on. So I hope that you all will be able to hear this. And the lucky part is this will probably be shorter than the first one because I got kind of long-winded on that one. So look, a lot of this information I need to tell you is in your book. And so a lot of it I won't be repeating because you'll be able to read it in your book. And if you have difficulties, let me know. But anyway, the first thing we're going to do is kind of talk about a history. Here's a 5-minute history of testing. And so you might want to just glance through this if you're interested in this topic. One of the things that I want you to note is the fact that the first person that was tested was in 2200 BC. I mean, that's before Common Era, BCE, before Common Era. So, that was a long time ago. So this is not a new thing. However, with the advent of technology, mimeograph machines, and things such as this, it's becoming more and more common. And it's more of an integral part in our society than it ever was before. One thing I want you to really look at Francis Galton, who you need to know. He did a lot of work on correlation. James Cattell is the one that really started using the word that we're going to have a mental test. The College Entrance Examination Board was created. Benet and Simon had their intelligence tests done. So we have the Stanford revision of the Benet-Stanford, which some of you may be aware of. One of the people we're going to talk about in the next couple of weeks is we're going to talk about Carl Spearman. And he had his idea about that various kinds of intelligence was needed for various kinds of issues. So he had a general intelligence, and then he had like a spatial intelligence, crystal, all of that other kind of stuff. The Mental Measurement Yearbook is one that you need to be aware of. It is a yearbook that at one time was published in hard copy. It was about this thick and had a list of all the tests and the meaning of the test on it. It's a measurement in which we could go in and look at a specific test to see if it's reliable, whether it's valid, if it's something that should be used again, that type of thing. The Wechsler Intelligence Scales began in 1939, which is a long time ago. We think, and it has been a long time ago. And so, as we go through here, let's look at the next page. Okay, we'll see that Donald Super began in 1957. You all have heard of him in employment placement and other types of tests. The Civil Rights Act, you're wondering, what did the Civil Rights Act have to do with testing? Well, the Civil Rights Act was important in realizing that there were some differences based on race, gender, etc., and that there should be equity in all of those. One that I want you to particularly note is 1971, the Gregg versus the Duke Power Company. It really changed a lot and had a lot to do with vocational testing because the Duke Power Company was a company that would only promote people once they were successful in passing this test. However, the test had nothing whatsoever, nothing to do with the job that person was going to be performing. So there was a lawsuit, and this is actually a Supreme Court hearing. And that is why instead of having one merit test in the state of Oklahoma, we have like 150. But we'll talk about that later. Another one of note I want you to look at is I want you to look at the Education for All Handicapped Children, PL 94-142, that really started looking at how do we measure and the quality of testing for children with disabilities. In 1990 and later reauthorized and amended in 2008 was the Americans with Disabilities Act. And that had a lot to do with the fact that individuals with disabilities, if required, had to show documentation that a disability existed and the type of modification that was needed. But on the other hand, the entity or whoever was providing the test or giving the test had to pay for the accommodations for that. And again, we'll talk about that later. And here's some wonderful pictures of the people that we talked about. And some of them look kind of scary, don't they? We'll go on. All right, here's two definitions of test and vocational evaluation. The first one is one that is in your book, and that it is a tool, procedure, test, device, examination, investigation, assessment, or something that we're trying to measure some kind of an outcome or some type of a behavior. One of them that I like is the second definition, which is the second bullet, and that is that it's used to assist an individual in choosing a course of action pertaining to their future educational, occupational, or situational status. So stop and think whenever you look at tests or measurements of any kind. Sometimes we're trying to decide what should be their educational future. Everything from very little children who decide are they ready for kindergarten or what. Also up to collegiate or high school. Should they go into a college prep program? Should they go into a technical program? And if they go into a technical program, what aptitudes do they have? It's also good for occupation. There's a lot of tests out there that we will learn about that will measure a person's aptitude and their interest to see what they're interested in, what their aptitude is in, and also what their situation status is. For example, does a person have the decision-making ability and the maturity to live totally independently, or do they need to live with assistance for others? So we also use testing to determine whether or not a person should live independently. Okay, what do we test? These are just a few of them. We may test achievement to determine what a person already knows. We may test personality to determine some of the kind of the difficult things, their value system, to measure a person. Are they a type A personality? Are they an introvert? Are they an extrovert? Are they judgment? So all kinds of personality. To test aptitude, what are they good at that they maybe have never received training, so it's like a natural ability. Vocational or interest, what are they interested in? What is something that just makes them excited? And so interest, because oftentimes we don't know. We know what we don't like to do, but we sometimes don't know what we like to do, okay? I'm sorry, my hair is bugging me. Okay, and then living situation, which is what I talked about before. Okay, here's an overview of what we test. This will summarize my conversation that I had, and I went ahead and put this PowerPoint in thinking that it would help you. Okay, why do we test? I mean, it's part of our everyday lives now. One reason why we test is selection. Who's the better person for the job? So we may give a vocational test to determine who is the best keyboarder of the two. That's the person that we may hire. We may decide on placement. Remember, we did this a lot in reading classes. Are you in the bluebird section or the redbird section? I mean, should a person go into gifted and talented, or do they have some type of a learning disability that they may need additional assistance in? We test because of diagnosis, and there's all kinds of diagnoses. We may not get into this a whole lot in this class, but we use testing to determine whether or not a person may have a personality disorder, a substance abuse program, so there's all kinds of diagnoses. We also use testing for hypothesis, and this is primarily in research. And again, we don't use that type of testing much in this class. Some of you are going, good. We may use it to classify. If we are trying to, say, do a questionnaire, we're trying to see how many people do we have within the age group of 20 to 25. So what about gender, race, diversity? Sometimes we're going to test just to gather information. What we may want to know is just, we're working with a person, we have no idea the kinds of jobs they want to go into. We suspect there may be some issues going on, but we don't know. So one of the things that can be testing is really useful for is just to help us gather information. Another one that's very good to help us with is decision making. And that is, you know, we have all this information. So by testing, we gather all this information. So it will help us decide if we know our aptitudes or interests. It will help a person make a decision regarding situational, occupational, educational settings that they may be interested in going into. Sometimes a person may know what they want to do, but we need to determine what their strengths and weaknesses are regarding that. So let's say they may want to be a nurse. Well, one of the strengths is they have outstanding people skills. They have the motivation. But you know what? Their math and sciences are a little bit iffy. So we can use this to prepare them and beef up their science and their math in order to go into nursing or whatever that might be. And lastly, it's used for justification. Oftentimes we're in a situation where we need to expend funds. And we can't say we're spending $20,000 on a person to go to college if we don't have anything to back us up and justify the expenditure of that money. So the Veterans Administration, vocational rehabilitation, other placement programs, workmen's compensation sometimes need testing in order to justify the expenditure of funds. All right, here's some basic testing information that you need to be aware of, and this part is not in your book. So you might want to make note of it and make sure that you go back and kind of save this PowerPoint. Standardized versus non-standardized. A standardized test is similar to the ACT, the GRE, some of the testing you've had in school, the Iowa Basic Skills Test. And there are very, very specific guidelines for the administration of and scoring of that test. So in other words, they may say that you sit 24 inches apart, that on your desk you need this. It's timed, and that's where the instructions go. Please do not turn the page until you are told to do so. Make heavy black marks on your answer sheet. Remember that? That's a standardized test. Also, on a standardized test, most of the time, not always, but most of the time, the scoring is objective. It's either right or wrong. The other end of that is non-standardized tests, and these are similar to teacher tests. These are tests that I may make for you all in your class, and it's not standardized. In standardized, sometimes we're trying to compare a person to a group of individuals. So we're comparing how this person scored to all other type of fifth graders, okay? Or we may be comparing it to criterion. We want to know, does this person know the criterion? And that's used a lot in licensure tests. So that's standardized versus non-standardized. There's two types of administration, and this is kind of like one of those duh things, either group or individual. So standardized can be given as a group, and standardized can be given as an individual. There's two types of time limits on tests, and this could be on standardized or non-standardized tests. A speed test is where the items are somewhat easy, but you have very, very limited time frame. That's one of those things where some people just go in there and go mark, 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 and you're sitting there and you're on number 14, and they've already finished with number 30. Intelligence tests like to use time limits because they want to see how quickly a person thinks on their feet. A power test is where there may be a lot of difficult items, but there's a lot of generous time limits. So that's similar to a final. You know how a final, the items are really difficult, but you've got 2 hours to take the test. And then finally, we have scoring. There's 2 types of scoring, objective and non-objective. Objective is it's true or false or multiple choice. In other words, it's right or wrong. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. You either got it right or you didn't. In non-objective is where the scoring is very subjective. And that is where the person that is scoring the test may be able to change it just a little bit. Have you ever taken an essay test and the person goes through and they underline certain things and go, well, yeah, they didn't exactly say it, but I'm going to get them partial credit. Or like a math. Have you ever done a math problem and you may get the answer wrong, but you got all the steps right, and they're going, no, I'm going to give them partial credit for that. Or maybe they got the steps right and got the answer wrong, and you get partial credit. That is non-objective scoring. Finally, standardized as well as non-standardized tests will have various kinds of content. One of the types of content is a verbal content, and that has to do with sentences, reading, spelling, that type of thing. A lot of achievement tests have a verbal content to it. Sometimes intelligence tests has a verbal content to it. Performance tests is where you actually have to perform a task. So let's say that you're taking a test to see if you have good clerical skills. And one of the things you have to do is actually take a keyboarding test or a typing test to see if you type 60 words a minute. So that's a performance test. A driver's test, whenever you go get your driver's license, that is considered to be a performance test before you actually do that. Most of the time, those are on aptitude tests, sometimes achievement tests. A cognitive test looks at the way a person thinks. How do they process information? And so oftentimes these are on intelligence tests and sometimes a little bit of aptitude tests. And then finally you have affective. And affective are very difficult to measure. Those are the intangibles. Those are things like value systems, honesty, things like that. And so those are primarily on personality tests, value tests, interest inventories. They're a little bit difficult to measure because it may be depending upon the time of day that a person takes it. Okay, there's something called a test user, and one of the things that the book does a really good job at, and I want to make sure you understand, is that a person can't just say, I'm going to give a test, and be able to ethically and legally do that. Nor can they say, I want to give the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory or the Rorschach or a projection test. You have to have certain skills and levels of education and training in order to do that. However, level A is where you really don't have a lot of special qualifications, but you have a testing course on your transcript. This testing course on your transcript will let you give a lot of screening tests, a lot of entry-level tests. And so that's one reason why it's good to take this test, this class. Another thing is level B is where you have, you belong to a professional organization, you oftentimes have a master's degree, and you have additional testing courses on there. Level C is where you're licensed or certified, so you're a licensed professional counselor, psychologist, and you oftentimes, on some of the tests, also have to have a doctorate. It's important that a person possess the knowledge on how to interpret and also how to administer a test. And that's one of the things we're going to work on a lot. So that I want you to be able to interpret a test to a person rather than saying, you're 1 standard deviation above the mean, or you're 2 standard deviations below the mean. You score within the 80th percentile. You have to know what that means, but you also need to know how to administer a test. So that's one reason why you have to have a class in testing. You'll learn how to interpret tests. I hope we'll get a lot of practice on that. One of the things that is an ethical responsibility of testing is to decide whether or not you're going to test or not. So there are some difficulties. There may be an idea where you may decide to test the person, but you don't follow through with the results. True story. Where a person they were thinking, he went to an agency and wanted to go to college. So they sent him for a battery of tests to determine what he would be good at, what his interests were, etc. But you know what? There was no follow through. He never heard the results of that test. So as a result of that, he thought that he was stupid, he must have failed the test, his self-esteem went down. That is not a good idea. When in actuality, he did very good on the test, but no one bothered to follow through with that. So it's important that it be followed through with the results. In addition, follow through may mean occupational information. So once a person has an idea what they're good at, that should be followed through with occupational information. Also, sometimes there's a misuse of tests, and I've seen it happen where a person administered a test, but it really, and we're going to talk about norm groups, it didn't match that person's demographics. It was skewed towards people that had high reading learning ability, primarily males. This was a female. She wasn't from that part of the country. She did not do well on the test, and so therefore she was labeled. And oftentimes, I can't tell you how many times people have been tested, but the test was not good. It wasn't interpreted properly. It wasn't administered properly. And as a result, you had poor information, and therefore the results were not positive or were not good. The other thing is sometimes you may decide not to test. And if you decide not to test, you don't have all the information. A gentleman comes to mind where he presented himself he was very articulate, he was well dressed, very poised, very dignified, and we sat there and the team thought, well, you know what, he's so good, I don't think we need to do testing. Let's just help him find a job. But you know what? Why not? He had time on his hands. We're sending for testing, and it was a good thing because we found out he could read. What he did is he faked it all the way through. So we went back and were able to put him in adult literacy programs, and he was able to get that. It was something he just never had a chance to do. Had we gone on, it would have been bad news. Some of the purpose and nature of tests is that we need to understand that each test is designed for a particular purpose. There's not a one test works for everything. Now, there's some multi-battery tests out there that are pretty good, but still it has its quirks. So you have to know, number one, what is it you're trying to know? What information do you need? And number two, is that the particular instrument, is that the particular test that will give you that information? So you don't want to just give a test for test's sake. You need to know the purpose. And then lastly, we're going to talk about ethics in Chapter 19, so I'm not going to really go over that. Okay, here are some important reminders. You need to know that some behaviors, some things you want to measure, you can measure more precisely than others. For example, it's pretty easy to measure achievement because you either know it or you don't know it. But it's not easy to measure personality, which may change according to the time of day and the way a person's feeling, and etc. Our understanding of behavior, our understanding is only as good as what the tools that we use. Next chapter, we're going to talk about, or soon, reliability and validity. If a test is not reliable, if it's not valid, then it's not a good instrument to use. It's not a good tool to use. The other thing is test and measurements can take on, and the way that they're presented can be in many different forms. It could be paper and pencil. It could be on computer. It could be observation, but it also could be work sample. And we're going to talk later in the semester that there's a group of people that do not test well. They just simply, you put a piece of paper and a pencil in front of them, you put them on a computer, and they're test anxiety. For some reason, they do not test well. But if you actually ask them to perform a work sample, guess what? They do brilliantly. So we need to keep that in mind as we go through the semester. Some other important reminders is that tests should be interpreted in the context from which they are collected. And this is something we're going to talk about. What was the environment? What was the person's frame of mind? This type of thing. We talked about a little bit earlier about how test results can be misused. And they can be misused if you're trying to say, oh, this person must have a very high general learning ability because they did well in their achievement test. And that may or may not be true. You know, remember when I used to work with a lot of kids that had learning disabilities. And you know what? They did not do well sometimes on an achievement test. But you gave them a test that measured general learning ability or intelligence, and they knocked the top of it. So tests can be misused, okay? Also, remember that we're going to use a holistic approach and that a person is not a test. So we need to remember that they are not exactly who they are as far as testing, that they are a person first, and then we need to see if those test results really pay out. So part of testing is also interviewing. It's looking at other data and not just the test. Okay, now this is just kind of weird stuff that he put on there. Why should you take this class? You know, it looks great on your transcript, which I'll agree it does, but it also shows that you have a testing course, and therefore there are a lot of people, because they have this on their transcript, when they find a job, they're able to do screening tests and group tests and things such as this. As far as an intellectual challenge, you know, we're going to take it baby steps. So it won't really be a challenge. There may be parts that kind of stretch it a little bit, but that's okay, all right? And then the other thing is this will give you a really firm foundation for any stats class that you have in the future. Okay. Now, one thing I want you to keep in mind is that when we get to some statistics, and they're baby statistics, so don't get upset. We're going to take it one step at a time. You may not be good at math, but you know what? You can do well in statistics. I barely made it through basic math here at the university, and I aced all my statistics classes. It's because it's a different concept. So just hang in there with me, okay? Test and measurements really are not hard. Form a study group. If you need me to come, if you need tutoring, contact me and I'll be glad to help. Ask questions. You know, I don't know if you have a question unless you ask, so please do that. And also, we're going to look for real-life applications. Some of you that are adult learners, when you take this class and we get to the achievement part, you guys will be pulling out your kids' test scores and be able to look at that. And testing, I think testing's fun. We'll do some fun stuff. Okay, so wrap up of your discussion and your assignment. Remember, I've already given that to you so you can look. Email me through Blackboard. Remember to do the practice test and the assignment that I gave you. All right? So good luck, and let me know if you have any difficulties. Thanks. And sorry about the issue.